Yo, everybody, this is Dr. Leo with the Mind Body Marathon podcast. And today we'll have a little bit different setup. It'll just be me. We'll do kind of a quick episode about a very specific topic of hamstring injuries. Definitely as it relates to all sports, but specifically runners. We'll kind of hit it from that topic. Um, and I wanted to tackle this one first as a kind of a primary because this to me is probably one of the most um, confusing injuries in the industry with in terms of how people interpret it and what to do. And I just feel like there's just like a lot of really bad information out there. And, it's no surprise that somebody, if they watch a football game or a baseball game, you hear, all these famous athletes and all these high end athletes are out with all these, hamstring injuries. And it just seems like such a common thing that you would figure that the rehab industry would sort of figure this out and kind of nip it in the bud. But in the end, we'll talk a little bit about like why that's the case and the blend of strength and conditioning and why that could be causing a lot of injuries and how they should be managed. So, in case you get one on your own, you basically know how to navigate through that. If you know anybody that has had chronic hamstring issues, uh, feel free to reach out and send them this episode and give them some insight in terms of what you might learn on this episode. Um, but for sure, this is definitely something that a lot of people have uh, ailing them and have sidelined many athletes. So, you know, with regards to hamstring trauma, so say you're a football player, hockey player, soccer player, and you are doing explosive movements amidst maybe some rest, um, where you're not 100% active, like in running or something like that, then it is likely that the hamstring could potentially tear in those moments because the moment where the hamstring might be at a relaxed and then it's asked to basically contract at a high rate, you're going to get some pulls and some strains through there and potentially even some tears. And that's different. That mechanism is different than what might happen in an overuse injury with, say, like somebody who's riding a bike or a runner, um, in the sense that they're going to get more overuse kind of injuries. So we'll kind of navigate through that. In those sports that you're going to get your trauma based injuries or your strain based injuries from like sprinting and like football and baseball and stuff, a lot of times those athletes have, because they're naturally sprinter power athletes, the hamstring is just a reflection of how the brain is recruiting the muscles around the hip. Most of them tend to have what we call retroverted hips, which is basically where they're going to come out of the womb with tight hip flexors and very compressed on the front. And then they're going to have that sprinter booty look, right? They're going to have that exposed glute, really strong glute max. But more importantly, they're going to have a very tight hip flexor. So the front of them is going to be very compressed. And so that's kind of why the hip is sort of retroverted, it's sort of kicked back. The reason why this matters is over time, these athletes tend to, yes, they have strong glutes, but they tend to become a little bit more reliant on their groin and their hamstring for hip extension or bringing the leg back or push off and running. And this is an issue because obviously those muscles are not designed to do that. The glute max is designed to do that. But this happens because the tight hip flexors over time, if they're not adequately treated, will shut off the glute max. And then as the event, the game, the sport, the race, the 100 meters, 200 meters, whatever you want to do goes on, the glute max begins to fatigue a little bit more. And then you over recruit the high hamstring or the belly of the hamstring, and then you pull it. And that's the vast majority of those injuries that are not trauma based. It's different if you get tackled and, it strains or whatever. That's different. We're not talking about that. This is more a conversation about like how if somebody's sprinting, how they can just pull a hamstring. That's happening because your brain is under recruiting your glute max and your hamstring is asked to not only guide the leg on impact, but it's also asked to enhance push off. So that brings me to the next point. What is the hamstring even designed to do? The hamstring, if we look at an anatomy book, is a very thin series of muscles, right? They're very tenuous. They're not designed to have any sort of girth to them. The bodybuilding world of the 70s and 80s, they have those hamstring curl machines that in the gym because they want to develop like large hamstrings, and it looks good on stage to be able to contract that. But from a function standpoint, the hamstrings are not really designed to be bulked up. They're never really weak either. We'll get to that topic uh, in a little bit. But basically, if you look at them, they're very long, sinewy, tenuous muscles. And um, they're just basically designed to guide the leg on impact. So when you're sprinting and the leg kicks forward, they're designed to kick the tibia or the shin back down and guide the leg on impact so that you land directly under your center of mass. Now, if you go through and you overly train them and you underactivate your glute max, then what'll happen is not only are they active on that phase where the leg is in front of you to where the phase where the leg is directly under you, or the stance phase, then they become active on push off. So then that means they are active in three phases of running. One of the big issues and one of the things I cover in my book is that the hamstring should technically only really be active in one phase of running, basically where the leg kicks in front of you to where the leg lands directly under you. They should not be involved in push off, and they should not be involved in picking the foot up when your leg is behind you. That's mainly the hip flexor's job. Um, so I think in one way, the sprinter or the athlete or the runner has missed coordination on how to utilize their hamstring. If we're doing it properly, like running, sprinting properly, whether it be long distance running or sprinting, when we are in the drive phase, when we're pushing off, the glute max is primarily designed to do that. When the leg leaves the ground and you're bringing the leg forward, scissoring the leg in the air, and the leg comes forward, your hip flexor is designed to do that. And then when your leg is about to strike the ground, your hamstring is designed to guide the leg on impact. That's the sequence of musculature that you should have. Um, and the hamstring fatigues when it's designed to be active in all three phases, which is the vast majority of people out there, which is why most people end up with a hamstring issue. And the last thing we want to do is go through and strengthen it and train it in the sense that, we're telling the brain that we want it to be even more active. And whereas in the way it's designed to be a guide wire, it's not designed to be strong per se. If you look at, the way, like I said, it is in an anatomy book, we don't want to send that message to the hamstring. We want to encourage the pelvis to be stronger. We want to encourage, phasic muscles of the quads and pelvis and calves to be stronger, and less the hamstring. Okay, so I think that's an important topic. Um, so a lot of hamstring rehab, like if you go to a physical therapist and you have a hamstring issue, a lot of times what they'll do is have you do like Nordics or like um, basically like general hamstring curls or like leg kicks or stuff like that. And that's okay. It's not great, but it's just okay. What you're really trying to do there is you're trying to get the hamstring to lengthen under tension. And I think that's an okay thing to do, but I wouldn't go through and then actively train your hamstrings if they are not already an issue. They do not really need to be stronger. They need to be disengaged. So again, in sprinter power athletes, it's not even really the hamstring that's the issue. It's the fact that you're under recruiting the glute max, and then the hamstrings are then being asked to do more than they want to do. So that's a very important message. You're often under recruiting the glute max because your hip flexors are tight. Like I said, in sprinter power athletes, that's very common. So one of the things you could do to fix that is like sit on one of those like devices where basically that's going to sort of trigger point release your hip flexors, and then reflexively then you'll be able to contract your glute max a little bit better. It's kind of like if I'm going to bend my elbow, I have to contract my biceps but relax my triceps. If I want to do the opposite, extend my elbow, I have to relax my biceps, contract my triceps. Well, say my biceps never relaxes, well, then I can't activate my tricep. I'm up against the standstill. This happens in the hip where neurologically, if the hip flexor is really overactivated, it will shut off the glute max and you'll dump all the energy to the hamstring. So again, the hamstring is not the issue. It's basically the fact that it's being asked to do too much. I often tell my patients, like, oftentimes where we feel pain is where um, where our bodies are being over recruited or being asked to do too much. And it's no different than work. So say you have, you're a business manager and you have 3, 4 people under you, and, 3 are being lazy and one's working overtime. Who's going to complain to the boss? Is it going to be the lazy people or is it going to be the overtime person? It's the person that's working overtime that often complains. So the same thing goes for your body. If you have an injury, that injury is telling you, like, that area is telling you, I am working too much. I need you to focus other areas and get them recruited. So I'm basically failing quicker than you think, or failing quicker based on the demands of what you're giving me. We need to shift the focus to the other lazy areas. And so that's why I think it's a huge error to go through and strengthen the hamstring. I cannot state that enough. Because again, the last thing you want to do to the overtime worker is give them more overtime. That doesn't make any sense. You want to tell the 3 other lazy people to then get more active, and then that fixes the problem. So that's generally the solution there. Now, with regards to like overuse injuries, if we kind of like talk about like ultra running, let's just kind of start there, go way on the opposite end of the spectrum from sprinting. Because again, the sprinting side of it would be related to the hip flexor, not weakness in the hamstring, but how you're recruiting the area. In a race like in an ultra marathon, what will often happen to the runner is they will pitch forward at the hips because they get tired. When that happens, so if you're standing nice and upright and you're running, and then you sort of like lean forward a little bit at the hips, not at the ankles, but at the hips, what you'll find is your high hamstring instantly contracts. And say you do that for, 50 mile or 100 miles, well, of course you are going to overwork your hamstrings because your body is being pulled forward and your hamstrings are contracting to pull your kind of hips back under you. And so that'll often irritate them as well. The other thing too that can happen is in ultras, your leg, if you looked at like how the leg is swinging, your hip, it really isn't doing that much motion because you're not really running all that fast. You're just kind of covering the distance. But what will happen is from the knee down, you'll do a big pendular motion. And that pendular motion is putting a huge strain on the lower hamstring. And so that's another way that you can get that strain through there. So a lot of times in ultra runners, they'll get strains through their outside hamstring, the biceps femoris. And that's mainly because that part of the hamstring has 2 heads. One head goes all the way up to the hip. The other head starts in the mid shaft of the femur. So that's the muscle that's really active when you're just kind of like gently swinging the leg back and forth from the knee down because you're not running fast enough to generate hip torque. So there you can often get some nerve impingements because of the volume of time you're on your feet. So it's not always the fact that the muscle itself is an issue. We need to differentiate, is there some nerve issues? And one of the ways you can do this is lay on your back and kick your leg up to about 30-ish degrees, 25, 30 degrees, and bring your toes towards your shin, like a straight leg raise. And when you do that, you should get no tension in the hamstring. And it's not how tight your muscle is. It basically insinuates like how much can the nerve slide through your hamstring, the sciatic nerve. And if you feel some pull at that 25 degrees with bringing your toes up, then you're probably a little bit locked up in that hamstring from the nerve, and it's important for you to get that to let go. So you can do some like nerve glides and things like that. So nerve flossing is an important thing to do at that point. But a lot of hamstring strains in those instances are often related to the nerve. Now, one of the last little bits that I want to cover with regards to hamstrings is the high hamstring. And that's basically just under your sit bone. And, anybody that has this issue, this is a complex injury. This is related a lot to sitting because when you're sitting, 2 things. One, you're shortening your hip flexor, which we established that earlier, that will shut off your glute max. The backup to your glute max is your high to mid hamstring. The other thing that'll happen is you're also preventing blood flow to go to the tendon of the high hamstring because you're literally just sitting on it. So I think it's important for you to sort of understand that that restricted blood flow is also part of the issue. And oftentimes this injury comes with, middle-aged athletes that are like, basically doing, a lot of like accounting, lawyer, like just somebody who sits a lot. Basically, that compression in through that tendon is really part of the issue. So you're getting poor blood flow based on that. One of the best ways to fix this is to do general glute bridges where you're sort of bridging your hips up. But while you're doing that, you're sort of externally rotating or having a band around your knees and then bringing your knees out or externally rotating your knees. What that'll do is that'll basically shut off the hamstring and teach your brain how to use your glutes in lieu of the hamstring. So then that'll fix it. Plus also, if you have that issue where you're sore in the higher part of the hamstring, you definitely need to get treatment. You should go to somewhere where they physically work on it. Do, ART, scraping, cupping, dry needling, shockwave, any of that. You have to get in on that tendon and break apart that scar tissue because the common hamstring tendon is very small relative to the size of the overall hamstrings. And it's just important that you get the scar tissue to break up in that region. Okay. So a little bit complex. Again, let's in review. If you have a hamstring issue, think hip flexor. Okay. Think glute activation. So we need to loosen the hip flexor. We need to strengthen the glutes. And then lastly, we need to roll out a nerve issue in the hamstring. Basically, is the pain coming from a tightness in the sciatic nerve. And so those are the three main things that you need to focus on. Now, I did not even mention stretching. I did not mention foam rolling, but I did mention like ART and Grassin and cupping and all that. And I think that's important for the hamstring. But I don't think you should just overtly stretch the hamstring for the sake of stretching the hamstring. Now, if there is pain in the hamstring, then like you have like you've strained it or you have pain in the high hamstring or right around the tendon or something, you should definitely not stretch that. Definitely do not stretch that because those fibers are vulnerable. So imagine if we have some tearing of these fibers, the last thing we want to do is yank that muscle. We need these fibers to recombine and be pain free before we can mobilize that tissue. Okay. That's really important to do. So again, if there is pain in the hamstring, do not go through and just crank on it and stretch it. If there's no pain in the hamstring and you're trying to prevent an issue, you need to gently, very gently do long sustained hold stretches on it, where you're holding it for like 2 to 5 minutes, where the stretch is gentle at first and you ease into it over the course of the 5 minutes. That's really important that you gently warm up the hamstrings and don't rush to yanking on them because they can strain easily when you do that. So I think that's a really important concept. And I also think like voodoo bands can be very important for the hamstring in the sense that that could be another tool to sort of mobilize it, where you have a heavy compressive wrap where it sort of wraps the belly of the hamstring and then you sort of mobilize the hamstring under that. So again, voodoo wrap, that could be a very beneficial thing as well. So again, primary thing, focus on hip flexors, loosening the hip flexors. Secondary, focus on getting the glute max to activate. And third, making sure the hamstring nerve or the sciatic nerve in the hamstring can slide and the hamstring itself has the ability to gently slide. But it doesn't need to be stronger. It doesn't keep pulling because it's weak. This is a huge error in strength and conditioning. I cannot stress this enough. Um, Structures that keep yanking and pulling are not too weak. They're being asked to do too much. It's the opposite thing. Now, let me kind of reiterate this point. If say you strain your hamstring and then you go to a doctor or a physical therapist and then they test your hamstring like muscle strength and then they go, "Okay, well your hamstring is weak, so that's what you need to do. You need to strengthen it." That is such an irrational thought. Imagine it's like saying like, "Okay, the worker that worked all day long that's now fatigued, we have put more work on him. How are they going to respond? They're obviously going to respond like with less gusto, correct?" So if you're testing a hamstring that is irritated, that is injured, obviously it will show up weak. I don't even understand how like that got through on research. This is like such a clear point in my mind where of course it will show up weak. We need to like make sure. Now it's different if we can do preventative checks. So say we're like kind of working with a trainer at the beginning of the season and we're doing hamstring testing at the beginning of the season before there's an injury, then that has a little bit more credence. But do not do that if you're already injured in the hamstring. It's obviously going to show up weak. Just be logical on that one. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. So I think that's a really important concept there. But again, the point of this episode was to just like sort of clarify some of these key points on hamstring management. Um, People who are watching in the video will kind of splice in some different things to kind of mention what I was talking about. And then those that were listening, feel free to go to the our running rehab YouTube page to kind of check out the video, and you'll be able to see some of the points that I was talking about. But again, if you have a hamstring issue or you know anybody that has a hamstring issue, please share this video. Please respond and give me some feedback on it, and hope it helped. Thank you. Dr. Leo here. Be sure to check out my new book, Faster Without Fail: Your Guide to Overcoming Injuries and Running Faster Than Ever. It is now available on Amazon. You could read reviews on the Amazon. You can check out what other people have said about it. But basically, if you want to revolutionize your running form and better understand how to stay injury free within the sport, this is your guide. Feel free to reach out and let us know what you think of the book. I would love to hear your feedback. But again, please check it out on Amazon. Faster Without Fail. Appreciate it. Dr. Leo here. If you want to catch me in another setting, be sure to check out my YouTube page, Running Rehab, where you will find exercises on how to stay healthy with running, how to improve your running form, and a bunch of other tips and tricks on how to get over common injuries.